Oh, it got me. It got me. Oh, episode 6 of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation nailed it for the most part. Really did nail Julie's little segment, and I'm glad they didn't shy from much in that whole scene. Now, there is quite a bit of context to be given here that I think they sort of skimmed over, but for the most part, oh gosh, it still got me. Like, I was still tearing up, and pretty much exactly what I was expecting. I've read this section, obviously. Like I said before, I've read up to volume 12, which is pretty much what's going to be covered in this second season. As per usual, this is my analysis of the episode itself. I do not get into spoilers that are beyond this segment. Just going through the episode itself, analyzing it, getting my thoughts on it, and then covering anything that may have been skipped by the anime adaptation. But even still, I knew when I read this section, the moment I hear that Seiyu speak those words from Julie's mouth, I knew it was going to get me, and sure enough, it got me. It is such a, yes, very controversial segment. This idea of this existing in this world. This is a thing in this world. This is something they're not shying past, and I can't wait until all the controversy comes from this episode. I cannot wait for the non-controversy people to get out there and say, oh my gosh, this is saying that it's pro this, and it's like, yeah, whatever. Moving on. Sure, keep whining. We'll move on. This is a reality in this world, and people are going to be upset about it. It's supposed to be upsetting. It was portrayed very well in a way in the novels and here in a way that this is not a good thing. And something positive comes out of it. That's the important thing. Something positive comes out of this whole experience with Julie. And yes, let's without further ado jump into it. First of all, like I say, I always check the Japanese broadcast. Nothing censored here. Pretty much what was broadcast in Japan is what we got, so don't worry about that. But yes, let's dive into it. Let's dive into this episode. It's such a good episode. And I think that they really did cover pretty much everything. Yeah, open up the episode, we have Rudeus is doing his daily routine. His routine has pretty much gotten very monotonous. He does spot a certain girl jogging around, which at this point is pretty obvious. We see that he's doing his classes, which I'll get into the classes stuff at the very end. I don't want to bore certain people that don't like the world building with that stuff right now, but I'll get into it at the end if you want that stuff. He hangs out with Zanoba. He notes that Elise has to get her regular deposits, which might be annoying. In the novels, he even notes the idea that at some point she would eat lunch with them, and she was not cool with the idea of getting with Zanoba, claiming that he's not a good man in her eyes. I think she fears him. I think she knows he's dangerous. It kind of showed him noting his food on his plate and the idea that it's Japanese, but he specifically mentions that it's called nanahoshi-yaki, and the soup being something like a curry was called kere soup, which again is kind of one of those interesting things. He notes that it's like, oh wow, this is kind of convenient that this place has food that is I'm used to, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like it's very well made. Like, you can't have what you want and it be perfect, which the nanahoshi-yaki is actually something that the novel readers have known about for quite a while. As Rudeus was returning home with Regerd and Edis, they actually went through the Dragon King realm. And while they were in there, he noted that there was a lot of rice fields and a lot of people were selling these things known as nanahoshi-yaki. Different things that resembled foods that he was used to, but they were all poorly made. But yes, he continues his research into the displacement incident. Fitz shows up. I like the fact that Fitz shows up and's like, hey, can I sit with you? Yeah, sure, here's a seat. I warmed it up for you. Please sit down. But yes, this is when Fitz kind of offers to help him with his research. Fitz mentions to Rudeus that they've been looking into the displacement incident, and he's like, oh man, I'm sorry about that. You have an acquaintance that's missing. I said, no, we've already found him. Fitz was just upset because they never got to go out and actually look for them. And yes, as everybody already kind of obviously figures here, that was Rudeus. Fitz wanted to find Rudeus. But now Rudeus has been found. But of course, Fitz doesn't want to tell Rudeus, it was you that I was looking for, and now you're here. But Rudeus does feel for Fitz, because he knows that Fitz is working for Ariel, and he figures that Fitz probably just doesn't have enough time to really go out and actually search. They're so dedicated with their work and protecting Ariel, which makes Rudeus really admire Fitz, like his dedication and his willingness to keep on his duties. But what's kind of interesting here is that in the anime, it mentions the idea that Fitz wants to help him with his research. You know, I don't have much time, and you're probably gonna think I'm a burden, but I would like to help you out. He's like, yo, no, that's perfectly fine. And I really did find it fascinating the direction that Fitz was taking in finding Rudeus. Rudeus is looking through all this research and finding anything that he can. And he's finding it difficult because teleportation magic itself is forbidden. This is a forbidden art. So finding books on it, it's going to be pretty much impossible because That's something, if there was a book that sat there that says, this is how you do teleportation, it would be removed. The government would take it away. And he notes the idea that really the only one that he's been able to find that was comprehensive was the one that Fitz told him about. The one about the teleportation labyrinth. But what I found really fascinating here, and it sort of glosses it over, at the very end of the scene, as Rudeus is wondering about why he's having feelings for a dude, Fitz is going on about this book and how they can use it to find out where people went. But this is exactly what Fitz had been researching. Their way of actually researching the displacement incident was to look into where people went. They started here, the displacement incident happened, and these are the locations they ended up at. And I thought this was a really cool way of doing that because you can sort of reverse analyze to figure out where people went. If there was a pattern to the displacement incident, like if you were in this area and you always ended up here, and then if you're right here, you ended up here, you could sort of, I guess, use some sort of analysis or mathematics to figure out where everybody went, which is really fascinating. But yeah, Rudeus is not even paying attention to this because he's too worried about the fact that he's being attracted to a dude. That's pretty much the thing that kind of continues on throughout this entire segment, is that Rudeus is constantly going, man, every time that Fitz smiles, I get all doki doki. Like, what is the deal here? But there was quite a bit that was cut from this scene after they were in the library. Fitz actually goes into talking about how they were kind of surprised that Zanoba is following him around. When Zanoba first showed up at the academy, Fitz mentions the idea that he was pretty much out of control, constantly fighting with people. But it wasn't until Lenny and Priscilla beat him that he kind of chilled out. Fitz also mentioned the idea that Lenny and Priscilla might not like the idea that he's hanging around Fitz. Because, yes, when Fitz first arrived with Ariel, they smacked down Lenny and Priscilla. That was the way that Ariel gained her position, was because she took out Lenny and Priscilla and their big, massive gang of beast folk. But other than that, though, it was a really good scene, though. Very beautiful, very well portrayed, great little shots they had there. And yes, kind of just showing the two of them just kind of walking together and talking to each other. They're doing a really good job so far of kind of establishing that relationship between Rudeus and Fitz. And yes, Rudeus' constant struggle that why am I constantly having these feelings? Even in the novel, Rudeus mentioned the idea that he talked to Elise at some point. She mentions the idea that, yeah, Fitz is really popular with the girls. Yes, most of the girls, when they're, yes, young and inexperienced, they just squee over Luke. But once they get some experience levels, apparently, at some point, their hearts tremble for Fitz. But that's when we get into the dilemma of Zanoba, and this stuff broke my heart so much. I have a soft spot for Zanoba. Zanoba is just best bro. And so this whole segment really did crush me. Again, to give people context here, Zanoba, after meeting Rudeus way back in Sharon, was exiled. But he chose that point that he wanted to be just like his master, Master Rudeus. I want to learn how to make figurines like he did. So he goes to the University of Magic. He goes there in order to learn Earth magic. He wants to learn the same magic his master does so he could do the same thing. He doesn't want to rely on Rudeus to make those figurines for him. He wants to make it himself so he doesn't burden his master. So yes, after a long time of making him wait, finally Zanoba's just at his wit's end. He wants Master to teach him how to make these figurines. And that's the sad thing because, again, this whole journey of Zanoba and coming here and everything was for this, and he has zero talent for it. He can't do silent casting, he has no mana capacity for it, nothing. And this absolutely crushes him. And even when Rudeus gives him the other option of just carving them, his hands aren't dexterous, and he's a blessed child that has too much strength, so it crumbles in his hands. This is devastating for him, to the point where Rudeus sees him and his face is just sunken in. He looks like he's in death because this is something he wanted so badly and he can't have it. It's super heartbreaking. It's like all these dreams of all this time, nothing. But no, I did get a kick out of him walking in and seeing Zanoba all over that thing. In the PV, they showed him kind of rubbing on it with like pants on and stuff like that. No, he was naked. So them actually changing that for the anime was a little more fitting, unfortunately. But no, this was kind of a little bit of a push to Rudeus' plans too, because Rudeus at this point, what his plans are is that he wants Zanoba to learn how to make figurines because he wants Zanoba to do it for him. Rudeus at this point is trying to create a mass assembly line. He wants to have people that can create his Rejured figures, and then he'll write a book about Rejured and sell the book with the figurine to the whole world. He's still stuck on this plan of helping Rejured save the name of the Superds. This is still something that is very ingrained in him that he wants to follow through with. Well, yes, plus at the same time, he figures it's going to make a bunch of money. Let's not shy from the fact that Rudeus wants to make a bunch of money selling figurines. But at its heart is this idea of spreading the good name of Rajerd. And that is through this book figurine bundle, which he wants to do with Roxy as well. He wants to make a figurine of Roxy, make a book about her and lauding her achievements that he'll sell as well. He even figured the idea that Zanoba, with all of his money, he could end up buying a bunch of people that will paint them as well. Again, this is, we're establishing right now Rudeus Smile Factory. Let's be clear, he wants to make a figurine printing company. But there is a lot of question in this whole scene in the novel about Rudeus himself. When he was adventuring, he found out at some point that his mana pool was not normal. He figured that most of the mages that he was hanging out with were just wasting all their mana. But at some point he realized that he had 5 times, maybe even more mana capacity than everybody else around him. And yes, the fact that he does know voiceless casting is a rarity too. He never found anybody else. The only people that he knew at this point that knew voiceless casting was Orsted, Fitz, Sylphie, and that was it. He tried to teach Ghislaine and Edis, but they couldn't never figure it out. The only person that he's taught that figured it out was Sylphie, which I really do like as we get into the trade area. That stuff kind of gets all revealed, which is really interesting stuff. But yes, feeling defeated and not wanting to let Zanoba down, he decides to go ask Master Fitz what they think, which this creates Mushoku Monday's ongoing phase. What does Master Fitz think? Oh, that was so good. Master Fitz has kind of already instilled upon him that he can trust him, that this is somebody that can help me. They're knowledgeable, they're really smart, they can always figure things out. So he'll constantly go to Master Fitz for their opinion. And yes, Master Fitz brings up the fact that yes, in the Asura Kingdom, there was a lot of people that wanted to do something, but they didn't have the skill to do it. So they would end up buying slaves and then teaching them how to do it so they could do it for them. So sure enough, it's time to take Zanoba and go to the slave trade. Which is where we get into this world and slave trade, which for anime onlys, this is something that's probably going to be new for you. In the novel series, we've gotten several glimpses of this. Specifically from Paul's perspective, when we were talking about how he was looking for displaced people, there was a lot of people that when they were displaced, they'd be put into slavery. Additionally, when Rudeus got to Chiron, the reason why Pax got away with doing stupid things when he was in that palace, he was bringing connections into Chiron for slave trade. And so nobody really wanted to mess with him because this was a key part of their economy at the time. Rudeus, even at some point when he's going to the palace, notes a slave trade. This is something that exists in this world, unfortunately. It was a quiet affair in the Middle continent and in the South Central continent. The northern territories were different. It was legal in most area and endorsed. It was an essential part of the economy, and some areas couldn't survive without it, meaning they don't have anything else to produce in their area, so they're just selling people off. Slaves were often orphans of war or sold by their parents whenever their crops failed. Some children even sold themselves in order to save their families. There was even a rumored ranch that was within the Thieves Guild. One of the other interesting things that he notes is that many children in the eastern areas of the northern region were bought up by the northern territories, mercenary bands, and the government to serve as cannon fodder during the war, which I would probably assume is that aspect that because they're in the northern region, they wouldn't turn on them as easily. And the final thing that he notes that in the Asura Kingdom, there was a large connection to the trade, buying up the best and most skilled. And since it was a very rich region and country, as sad as it is, if you're going to be sold somewhere, you're going to be more well off if you were sold there. Again, doesn't make it right, just it exists here, and if you have no choice, this is your best option. Not that you have a choice. But anyhow, with all that aside, we have the date. Fitz, Zanoba, and Rudeus getting together to go to the trade place. I do love how they kind of portray that Zanoba's like, well, I am Zanoba Chiron, the third prince of the Chiron kingdom, and Rudeus kind of just knocks the knees out from underneath him. Show respect to Fitz. Which, yes, is completely flustering to Fitz because, yes, this is royalty. We know that Zanoba was exiled, but the public doesn't know that. And so he is, in Fitz's eyes, a prince. And I can't have a prince bowing his head at me. But yeah, they end up making it to the Ruim Group Market. This is a place that's pretty much beginner-friendly for buyers. Mainly clientele that have deep pockets. Hence, Zanoba. He has very deep pockets. I got a kick out of how they portray this scene because, yes, at some point, Fitz is... Every one of them in there is butt naked. I don't know why the female, for some reason, was still wearing something, but again, it's for TV. But no, it's funny because it was a little more obscure with what Fitz was actually looking at. Fitz was looking at this grouping of all these very buff-looking individuals, and Rudeus didn't know who Fitz was looking at. In the anime, it's pretty obvious. Fitz is like right in the crotch of this guy going, wow, they actually get that big. And Rudeus is like, in the novel, Rudeus is going, well, Fitz is obviously looking at the woman's chest, not the guy's crotch. Because again, Rudeus still thinks that Fitz is a dude. But in the anime, like I said, it's completely obvious what Fitz is looking at. But yes, it kind of brings up that aspect of like, oh, well, Rudeus is actually experienced, which upsets Fitz, hoping that Rudeus was a virgin. But yeah, putting that aside, this is where we get like some super cool in-depth look into what makes Rudeus so special. Fitz just starts spewing a whole bunch of info about how a person themselves can grow as a mage. According to Fitz, silent casting is something you can't really learn beyond the age of 10, which yes, makes sense through Rudeus' perspective and Sylvie's perspective. They were both very young when they learned voiceless casting, hinting at the idea of anybody like Edis, Ghislaine, can't learn it. Additionally, mana pool building, which Fitz says that if you start working on it before you're 5, it can exponentially increase your mana pool, and that your mana pool itself does not really grow beyond the age of 10, which is really fascinating. Once again, this is sort of an area of life that you can grow a lot as a mage, and if you don't, too bad. Which really is like one of those ones where you're like, whoa, Rudeus, you dodged the bullet there. This is like, if you didn't do it here, it would have never happened. Which makes sense as somebody that is a reincarnate. He's gonna be trying out these kind of things, whereas a normal kid in this world, they're not thinking about that kind of stuff. They're just thinking about having fun and playing. So yes, they decide that they want to get a dwarf because they have dexterous hands, roughly around the age of 5, so they can learn voiceless casting and increase their mana pool. And then Rudeus specifically wants a cute little girl because he just throws that in there, which gets him yelled at. Now here's where, unfortunately, we get our first skipped scene. And I really don't like this because this does sort of show how much Zanoba cares for Rudeus. Rudeus goes up to this guy, one of the tellers, and says, hey, I'm looking for somebody to buy. And the guy doesn't really pay much attention to Rudeus. And Zanoba gets mad. It's like super mad, goes up there and attacks the guy. And then all the guards flood in to stop Zanoba, and he just shrugs them off because he's a blessed child. He just kind of just, get off me, kind of thing. And Rudeus kind of chills out the situation like, no, look, I'm sorry, guys. It's okay. I'll keep him in check. And the guards kind of like, okay, like they don't want to deal with Zanoba. They know that he just brushed them off so easily, and so they're kind of just like accepting it and walks away. But again, it kind of shows that aspect of Zanoba doesn't like anybody disrespecting Rudeus. So when this teller is disrespecting him, he gets super angry. It is an aspect of how much he cares for Rudeus, but it's also an aspect of how short a fuse he has. Which, yes, knowing that he is as powerful as he is, strength-wise, that is sort of a dangerous thing. But yes, finally the Julie scene. Now, yeah, they kind of portrayed everything right. They asked the teller, okay, this is what we need. He says, we have one, but she's really malnourished. And they're like, okay, let's go check her out. So they go into the back area. In this front area, they kind of showed very briefly when they first entered, Rudeus was taking off his coat because it's extremely hot. Because yes, outside it's freezing. Like, this is the northern region. It's very cold here. And he kind of mentions often that Fitz is kind of walking around with all this coating and everything on. And he's like, gosh, Fitz has got to be burning up. But yes, where they go back to find Julie is like extra stock. It's the worst, the ones that are malnourished and sick and whatnot. Each of the cages are full of 1 or 2 individuals in every single one of them. Some of them have the look of a murderous intent. This isn't a good place. And it's freezing back here. There's no heat or anything back here. All of them are freezing in these cages. And they go all the way to the back where they find Julie. And it's a tough scene. Ugh. Yeah, they mentioned the idea that, she's malnourished, she's around 5, her parents sold her off because they need to cover their debts, and she's just dead-eyed in there. They drag her out, she doesn't respond to anything, the guy was about to hit her, but Rudeus kind of stops him, thankfully. But there's so much in this scene. One, they mentioned the idea that she's sick, and this kind of shows you the mindset of these traders. They're not going to waste their time curing her because they figure she's just going to die anyways. They even mentioned the idea, you probably don't want to even bother with her because she's probably not going to last long. But yes, this girl does kind of fit their criteria. She's a dwarf, she's young, and yes, she's a cute little girl. But the problem here is that Rudeus immediately notices her eyes. There was one problem with this girl. She fits everything, but there's something that's bothering me. Her eyes. And so yes, using beast tongue, he talks to Julie. And take note, nobody else in this room, in this area, knows Beast Tongue. He's the only one that does. And so there is a pretty much a one-on-one conversation happening here, and nobody else knows what's going on. They don't know that Rudeus literally proposes to this little girl, this 6-year-old, do you want to die? He's seen her eyes. There's so much in this scene right here. It is so heartbreaking. He's seen the eyes that he's seen back in his previous life looking in a mirror. So he says, if it's that bad, should I just end it for you? I do like in the anime, they sort of portray this by the idea that he reaches out, moves her collar, and puts his thumb to her throat. He was going to, it's that kind of symbolism that he was, do you want me to do this? I will do this for you. And this is such an uncomfortable scene through and through. When I read it, and now when I'm watching on the anime, this is such an uncomfortable scene because this is literally Rudeus going, I know what you're going through. You want me to end it? And so it does seem like it's very controversial. Like, holy crap, he's offering to kill this little girl. Why would he do that? In his mind, he's thinking, there was a time when I generally wanted to die. Again, his previous life, when he was a shut-in. And when I didn't, I kept on living for a long, long time, and he'd come to regret it. This sort of indicates that when he was in his previous life, and he became a shut-in, and he hated life, but he kept going. And way into his previous life, that's when he started to regret that he ever continued on. Because nothing changed. And he thought, I can't save this girl. I could buy her clothes, I could feed her, and I can even give her kind words. But he knew better than anyone that didn't equate to him saving her life. This is kind of one of those really bold moves in storytelling. Typically with a lot of isekai shows, what happens when it comes to, slave trade and stuff? They save the cute waifu from that evil cage and that evil seller, and they give him a great life, and they become a waifu for his harem. It's always so grandiose and praised and happy and wish fulfillment. Here it's not that. He sees that she's broken like he was, and he knows full damn well that if he releases her, it's not as if her life is fixed. She was sold by her parents. She has nothing. She's dying. She's in pain. And she's freezing. So he thought, if that were the case, it'd be better off to end her. If, like me, she could die and be reborn into a better life, it might be best for her to call this one quits and try harder the next one. That scared me. When I read that, that scared me. This is Rudeus assuming that anybody, possibly, if they die, will just be reborn into a new life and they can have a great life like he has. That's a bad assumption. This is something that sort of opened the door to really scare me about Rudeus. This idea that he thinks that he can just end people's lives and they'll have a happy new life. If I could just end her right now, she might have a better life. She might get isekai'd like I did. Just like me, when I hated my previous life and I finally died, it was so releasing and I had this new life. She can do the same probably. That's scary. That was super scary when I read that. But this when he gets into like his own experiences and having people say things like, you could do it if you put your mind to it. So many people, according to him, for their own self-satisfaction, was trying to give him that little bump in his previous life. And it never worked. But he figured that because she was young, she might be able to pull it off. She might be able to build a new life. That's what he wanted to say to her. But he knew people did that to him too, and it never worked. He was constantly told the same thing. You can make it. Just keep trying. So he didn't want to do the same thing to her. And he figured, from his experience, nothing but death cured his stupidity. He had no idea if she was the same as him, going through the same thought processes, but it ultimately all came down to letting her decide if she wanted to keep trying. That was the question. Do you want me to end it? Or do you want to try? And that's when she said, I want to live. Oh, it was so hurt. I was so happy when I read that, and I was so happy when I seen it on screen. I want to live. Oh, it was so... Julie girl. Ganbare. Yeah, when I watched this, I got welling up in my eyes. I was tearing up. Oof. The Seiyu nailed it. That break in her voice that just... It hurts. It hurts so bad. But yes, he immediately put his robe on her, cured her with detoxification, said we'll buy her. Such a good segment. Like I said, there's so much here that's not just about getting Julie. It's not so much about saving her, but so much about Rudeus technically wanting to give her an option to not try again, to just end it. And it's so heartbreaking. But again, it feeds in that aspect of the idea of, I don't have a fix for you. I'm not going to save you. Like all these other isekais where they just come in, they save the waifu from the cage. That's not this scene. This is, she wants to die. She looks like she wants to die. Her eyes look just like whenever I looked in my mirror at my previous life. Same eyes. But yes, the following scene was super cute. I have a cute picture in the novel for, but yes, they're eating. Sucks that they didn't really put much emphasis on this, but again, I'll give it to you here. Obviously, they need to decide on a name. And because dwarves don't really get a name until they're like 7, she wouldn't have a name. So Rudeus asks Zanoba, and Zanoba responds, Julius, my dear brother, whom, because I could not control my own strength, I killed him. Oof. Oof. And they'll talk about this a little bit later on as well, if the anime covers it. But yeah, this is one of those first signs that Zanoba regrets killing his brother. For those who don't remember, way back in Sharon, when they first introduced Zanoba, they talked about the fact that at some point, he killed his brother accidentally. Everybody was celebrating because this is the first born child of the first queen. Everybody was celebrating. And Zanoba came up, loving cute plushies and toys and stuff like that, and he reached in there. Everybody was going, aw, Zanoba loves his brother. Touches his brother. Killed his brother. It wasn't intended. He didn't know how to control his strength. He killed his brother. And it's like that mindset of like, well, he's probably warped or whatever. He doesn't probably even know what he did. No, this is a sign that he regrets that. I killed my dear, beautiful baby brother. And he wants to continue on his name by giving it to Julie. So it was, again, like one of those little brief moments where it's like, if you think about it, that's kind of tragic. But yes, she stumbles over saying Juliet until eventually he just decides, fine, Julie's fine. She's so cute. Julie is super cute. Is super, super cute. But yes, following that, she starts to attend to Zanoba, falling around, picking up his trash, and yes, Zanoba trying to instill upon her the wonders of figurines, while Rudeus kind of teaches her how to do silent casting, teaching her human tongue and all that kind of stuff. It wraps up very, very nicely. Such a good episode, though. Such a good episode. Super cute. Julie was super cute, and cannot wait for it. Now, sadly, because there is like one really good extra chapter with Julie in it, it's about her table manners, and I don't think the anime is going to cover it because they've skipped most all the extra chapters, but if we get around to that and they don't cover it, I would love to talk about it because it's a super, super cute scene. Julie's adorable, and now Zanoba has his method of hopefully producing figurines, which is great. And yes, we will start the company that is Julie Smile Company. As Rudeus puts it, we're going to get a whole bunch of dwarf girls, and then we're going to just make them all make figurines. Julie Smile Company. But yes, the brief stuff that I mentioned earlier that they did skip, in his Divine Magic classes, afternoons, he took a Foundations in Healing Magic, Divine Magic, and Barrier Magic. Divine being good against ghost types and gaseous beasts, which you kind of got into that a little bit in the novel as well when Rudeus was going down into the ruins with Counter Arrow, which they completely skipped. Rudeus thought that Divine Magic would be similar to Disturb Magic, because it basically uses mana in its rawest form to strike an opponent. Rather than turning it into earth or something like that, it's using mana in its raw form. But just using pure mana didn't do any damage. So he figured there probably was more to it. For now, he's kind of just focusing on learning the theory behind it, and then memorizing each incantation. Again, this kind of goes back to something that is really deep within Rudeus. Every time that he looks into something, it's always to kind of learn how it works. Which, yes, that technically worked out for him with using voiceless casting when he was young. Even if he can't use it or whatever, he's going to learn how it works. Just like Disturb Magic. If I can't use it, I'll learn how to counter it. He is an absolute RPG nerd at heart. Which, yes, is technically a thing with Refugin. He goes in to explain that to be skilled as a Divine Magician, you had to analyze your opponent. Surely he figured that that applied outside of Divine Magic. He knew that some first-rate swords fighters could cut right through ghosts, no needing to analyze it. Which again goes back to that point that I was making when he first arrives at the University of Magic. The speech the principal gives and this idea that warriors are OP in this world. And so to have to analyze and use specific types of magic to work on ghosts while swords fighters go, done, seems weird. He goes on explaining barrier magic, which creates a protective wall using magic circles. But he knows that at beginner tier, you can create it through incantations. Magic shield had the power to isolate flames or cold to reduce the effects. But then he wondered why there wasn't any shield against physical attacks. But his teacher informed him at this point. Remember what I was talking about earlier with the magic-resistant bricks and how the University of Magic had like this, or at least the Magician Guild had this monopoly on it? Millis has its own stuff too. This is like a world of copyrights and capitalism in this world itself. But yes, his teacher informed him that the Mills faith owned rights to divine and barrier magic, leaving the university to only be able to teach the basic levels. They can't go beyond that. Physical shields was an intermediate tier of spell, which yes, the teacher knew. That teacher in front of him knew how to use it, but he'd be hunted down and put on trial if he taught it. Basically, Millis would come after him for teaching him something that he's not allowed to teach. It's crazy. And what they were able to teach, they only got allowance 2 years ago. Saint tier and above could create barriers that combine both physical and magic proofing. There was also barriers to protect oneself and lock something inside a barrier, which yes, Rudeus kind of went through some of this stuff in Sharon. And yes, Rudeus mentions the idea that Roxy tried to teach him about barriers at some point, which he's probably regretting at this point, but he tuned out most of it, so he'd have to review it. Which I think the anime mentions it something like, yes, Roxy taught me, but I need a refresher or something like that. No, I assume that he was probably too preoccupied. In the anime, they show that scene where he's too busy trying to see up her skirt. That was probably when she was trying to teach him barrier magic. But yeah, that's pretty much all the stuff that was kind of side bit that they kind of glossed over or skipped. But again, still a fantastic episode. Really did love it. Hope you guys enjoyed my analysis, extra content run through of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation Episode 6, second season. As per usual, if you like this content, make sure to hit that like button down below before you leave. Leave me a comment. Let me know what's thought of the episode. Additionally, if you're new to this channel, make sure that subscribe button's get all my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, I do a Mushoku Sunday every Sunday where we talk about the anime itself. And every Monday, I do Mushoku Monday, covering the novel series. Currently, we are in Volume 13, which is right after what we assume is going to be covered with the second season. So don't go in there unless you're ready to get into that stuff, or if you've already read it and you just want to get my full analysis. I love to deep dive into every single sentence. Some people claim that I do too much, but at the same time, we have a lot of fun. Each premiere every single Monday has been so much fun, but I thank you guys for your support. If you like this content, you want to support the channel more, I have a Patreon link, tips link, super thanks, membership button down below. Greatly appreciate what it does, and y'all take care.